Hello and welcome back to the second section of this tutorial on the passion of financial modeling. Before we get into the modeling framework, I told you in the previous section that we're now going to start getting into playing around with two spreadsheets. There's two that I've included that are available for download. There is one file that is titled Financial Modeling Module 1. I'd like you to download and open that. This is going to be the primary spreadsheet that you're going to be working with as you construct a financial model. And the second one is this file titled Fertilizer Industry Analytics, and I'll show you what this exercise was. I'll explain that a bit, and I'm going to use these two files as a way of helping you understand why certain best practices matter. So before we begin, just some tips on how to think about the keyboard, how to think about the shortcut. So spend some time navigating this file, Financial Modeling Module 1. And the way you navigate tabs is if you are sitting with a larger proper keyboard, it's Control page down, allows you to toggle between tabs. Or if you are sitting on a laptop, usually it's Control function and the up down arrow key that allows you to toggle between two different tabs. This is going to remain a really useful basic shortcut, and this also works on Macintosh. What doesn't work on Macintosh, unfortunately, is this Alt key, and this is going to become your new best friend as you try to master keyboard shortcuts. And roughly here's how it works, right? Like when now here you can see I am following some best practices. I'm my inputs are blue, my calculations are black, and there's no strange formula included in them. Everything is calculated. But let's say I wanted to turn this 201.8 into an input. How would I do that? Well, if I were to type 201.8, now that this is an input, I've got two things that I can do to turn this blue. I can either copy the cell where it's already painted blue, and I can hit Alt ES to go to Paint Special, and then press T for formats and hit enter, and this is just going to copy the formats, right? This is one way of doing it, and then if I hit Control Z, I can undo that. So so what I did, just to slow it down, I copied a cell using Control C, went to the cell where I wanted to copy formats, then hit Alt ES, and then hit T for formats. Now you're going to see that when you hit Alt ES, underneath the T, this T is underlined. And so if you wanted to, for example, paste values, you would press V. If you wanted to paste column widths, you would press W. And that's generally how keyboard shortcuts in Excel work. Before getting into just the specifics of the keystrokes that I hit, I just want you to do the following. Press the Alt key and pause for a minute, and notice that these letters have lit up, and all of these letters are going to let you access a certain menu. So let's say you wanted to change the color of cell I8, but you didn't want to do paste special. How would you do it? I mean, if you were to use the mouse, you would go to this thing and click it, right, on font color. But if you wanted to use the keyboard, you would do Alt, then you would press H to access the home, and as soon as you press H, you can see a whole lot of other numbers and letters lighting up, and where you want to go is here, and to access that you press FC, and now you've opened this color palette, which you can then start toggling through your cursor pads, and you can pick a blue that you want that you want to assign over here, and voila. So that is how keyboard shortcuts are used, and you will be doing so much practice on these keyboard shortcuts when we actually get down to populating this spreadsheet, that they will become second nature to you by the time you are done with this exercise. So do not feel overwhelmed at this stage if the keyboard keys that I hit that appeared a bit too fast. What I want to do next is show you why following best practices matters. So this was a really interesting exercise that I did, and in case you are wondering how I am using my keyboard, I want to increase the zoom, and one way of increasing the zoom is by clicking here, or I can hit Alt VZ and press tab and then just press a number, and that allows me to increase zoom, right? And again, keyboard shortcuts just make the whole process of navigating a spreadsheet so much easier. So some context behind the spreadsheet. Years around 2012-13, and at the time I worked with the Hercules Group, and there was a peculiar situation in Pakistan where some of the fertilizer assets that were on the SNGPL, or the SUI Northern Network, they were suffering from more gas curtailment compared to those fertilizer plants that were on a different gas network. And it's not important getting into why that was the case, but I wanted to, the group I worked with, we wanted to understand some scenarios regarding, what the likely behavior of the fertilizer industry would be, and also to try to get a sense of, what kind of price increases at different curtailment assumptions would be needed. So what we did, what you see in front of you is a very high-level financial model of the entire fertilizer industry. And where this whole exercise becomes really interesting is the 100 zoom wasn't really useful. So pay attention to this gross profit delta between the fertilizer units on the SUI network versus the fertilizer units on the MARI network, and start increasing urea selling price. And as you increase it, you're basically trying to create a visual to understand that, okay, where do these SNGPL plants start breaking even, and what happens to the other plants, right? And of course, as you keep playing with this toggle, you reach a fertilizer price of close to 2,000 rupees, which is where prices shot up to around then. And what was break even for some was a windfall gain for others. And as you can see in this scenario, in this basic spreadsheet, we've managed to very quickly explain a complex point by creating this visual. And as this course goes along, I will show you how to create these buttons, how to create these visuals. But what's really helping us is following these best practices, that the inputs are blue, the calculations are black, and the links are green. Like, for example, these links are showing us what the capacity of each plant is that's coming from another tab. And whenever you have a link, you know that what you want to do with the link is follow it, and control open square bracket, this is the letter on the right of the letter P, control open square bracket will let you follow the link. And again, you're going to see more best practices being followed over here. And to now go back to where you initiated, if you press F5 and enter, it allows you to toggle back. So purpose of showing you this spreadsheet is really to help you understand that, look, this is the kind of outcome that you will create. And as we get into the modeling framework, as we get into populating this spreadsheet, some of my insistence is going to feel pedantic, and you may be thinking, is it really necessary? And is it really necessary to always have color coding done in a certain way? The short answer is yes. And I before we move on to the next section, just want you to internalize this idea that excellence comes from habits. Roger Federer doesn't serve the way he does repeatedly because, just kind of wakes up like that. He's just got really, really good habits. If you want to become, Roger Federer, like in the world of financial modeling, you need good habits. And some of the habits are listed in these best practices. That's what they are. That's what it means for you to have. And I want to emphasize, when you get started, it's going to be tempting to just use the mouse because it's the easy thing to do. But if you can commit to telling yourself, I'm not going to use the mouse, I am going to find a keyboard shortcut for everything, you will see your productivity shoot through the roof, and it's not going to take more than a couple of weeks. So take that chance. Do not use the keyboard shortcut. And with that, let's go back to our course and talk about the KADMOS Modeling Framework. Okay, so what is this Cadmus Modeling Framework? When I started learning financial modeling, I was teaching most of it to myself, and I remember this feeling of overwhelm that would come upon me whenever I would get a financial model for the first time, because this may not be the case for some of the experienced folks taking this course, but if you're a college student and you're learning the skill for the first time, when you see a whole lot of tabs, it's this overwhelming feeling because you don't know what the right starting point is. So I really wanted to create a very high-level mental model, I guess, a high-level framework that would help in thinking sequentially about financial models. And that's what this framework is. The way I want you to think about the framework is that the first step is thinking about the operating model, or in simple words, this is the stuff that is captured in the income statement above the EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization line. This is the very basic stuff around how much does it cost to build your product and how much, what price can you sell that product, or similarly, how much does it cost to deliver a service and how much does it cost to actually put that service together. It's the basic building blocks of that income statement. When you have done all of the basic calculations and you've gotten to EBITDA, your next goal is to get to net income, right? Now, to get to net income, you first need to get to EBIT, which is earnings before interest and tax. So what do you need? You need to create a depreciation schedule. And that's usually the second schedule that you would make after you've made your income statement down to the EBITDA line, because as soon as you have your depreciation and amortization schedule, you are now down to the EBIT line, which is earnings before interest and tax. And sure enough, the next step is going to be coming up with the debt and interest schedule so that you can calculate the I, or in EBITDA, which allows you to get to earnings before taxes. And then finally, if you just follow this logic, build the tax schedule next, and that lets you get to net income. Once you've completed the income statement, you want to get to the change in cash, because going back to your accounting knowledge, an income statement really just captures what has accrued in a given period. It doesn't necessarily capture what was the change in cash. To capture the change in cash, you need to understand a couple of other line items, and in particular, this is the working capital schedule and the shareholders equity schedule. Because if you go back to how do you get from net income to cash flow, in net income, you first add back depreciation because it's a non-cash charge. And then you take into account changes in working capital, which is changes in account receivable. If account receivable has gone up, that is a negative for cash. And changes in account payable. If account payables have gone up, that is a positive for cash. Once you capture these changes, you have cash flow from operations. From this cash flow from operations, you next need to subtract the investment activities, and this is going to be coming from your capital expenditure and depreciation schedule. Once you've subtracted your capital expenditures, the only set of cash flows that are left are the ones coming from your financing activities. And for that, you will be using your debt schedule that you've already made and the shareholders' equity schedule to calculate how much equity was raised or how much equity was bought back. Once all of these schedules are complete, then you start bringing them together in the balance sheet and connecting that balance sheet with the cash flow statement. I talk about incorporating a circular reference. I just want to caution you, you don't need a circular reference to balance a financial model. This is a misconception a lot of first-time analysts have, that my model isn't balancing because I have not incorporated a circular reference yet. A circular reference is just, it exists mainly because you want to calculate interest income. But sometimes, frankly, it's an overcomplication that folks get into. You can skip out that interest income if if the circular reference is becoming problematic. I've mentioned it here because most practitioners like it. The slides 15, 16, and 17, they capture in more detail, or they repeat some of the stuff that I said about the KADMOS Modeling Framework. The main things that I want you to remember are, whenever you're getting started, start with the operating model, start with the income statement, start by figuring out how does a business make money. This will help you get to EBITDA. EBITDA is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization. Think of it as your gross profit minus your operating costs. To get from EBITDA to net income, think about the schedules that you need to make to keep going to the next step. So to get to EBITDA to EBIT, you need the depreciation schedule. And just like that, work your way down the financial statements. Think about all the schedules you need to complete the income statement, make those schedules first. Then think about all the schedules you need to attach or to populate your projected balance sheet, make those schedules next. And then finally, get to your cash flow statement to tie in the three financial statements. And once that is done, you at least have a integrated income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow. Now, this is still not going to help you fulfill the model's objective because you still need a dashboard beyond that, but we're going to talk about that later. For now, it's just important for you to recognize what this framework is, and in order to really help you master this framework, we are going to start by thinking about the operating model. Before we can do that, just a brief case study. We have to use a case study over here just to, give you some rules to play with. I want to emphasize that whenever it's less important what industry we are modeling for, I want to give you the tools that will let you rip apart any industry. It's like, I read this book recently, The Art of Learning, and in it the author talks about the need to go slow first in order to go fast later, and the author uses this example that when he taught himself how to play chess, he only played with the pawn and the king in an end game scenario for the longest time, and only then added more complexities. That is the kind of mindset I also have in teaching this course. So I have created an oversimplified case study, and that's largely to help you really get comfortable with a whole lot of basics. Once you do that, you will be able to construct more meaningful analyses, such as the one that I showed you related to the fertilizer industry analytics. So with that, let's dive into the case study. So, all right. So, obviously there's, Greek mythology has a whole bunch of has inspired some of these names of Cadmus and Thebes. And this airport was actually inspired by a city where my mom is from. My mom is from actually a village near the city. She's from this village called Kotli Dohara. It's near this city called Sialkot. It's a city I've lived in, and it's a really incredible entrepreneurial story of that city and of this airport. This airport was literally built by the businessmen of the city, and at some point I was advising them on some matters. So I mean, none of these numbers are from that airport, but it's inspired by that. And so the story is that we've got an airport, and it's got revenues of 75 million rupees, and it's thinking about an expansion. And the management of that airport who wants to bring in investment, and here are some historical financial statements. And I mean, I still haven't updated the years because those were the years when I first drew up this case study, and I think it's still totally relevant, which is why I'm teaching it now. And there are some metrics about the valuation, the capital structure. It's not all that important. I chose some interesting names for the shareholders to reflect on the politics of my country, which I'm not really going to get into in this course either. But it's just some maximum, I guess, some entertainment value for you. But the way I want you to think about this case study is that there's an investment fund that invests in infrastructure assets. They want a 20% IRR. They've hired you. So now here is your model purpose. Your model purpose is to help a partner at SAS decide whether making an investment in Thebes Airport is a good idea or not. And that's how we're going to think about this case study. That is how we're going to think about designing this financial model. Before getting into, and now that this model purpose is defined, that we're really building this model because we want to help an investor decide whether Thebes is a good investment or not. Now that we've written that model purpose statement in our head, now we can start thinking about the operating model. So